start. And here it is.
Here I am.
There you are.
I got the document, so now I see all the questions.
Okay, good. So I'm going to ask that for us to begin, let's just start with a deep breath. Let's ask everybody, wherever you are, just take a deep breath with us. Take a deep breath in and exhale. And get cozy. If you need a glass of wine, if just anything that's going to make you feel good or delicious, maybe bring some tea, whatever it is, and settle in. Because what we are going to be talking about today is, and can be quite triggering.
Yeah.
It can be quite triggering. So I just wanted to bring that forward as we move into this talk. Today we are gathered together in all this deliciousness to have a talk called Speaking with the Sages, which I so love the name of this one, what sex workers can teach you. And what can sex workers teach you? I think that we're going to be discussing a lot of different avenues and aspects because sex work is an integrated space. And I wanted to kind of just give us this moment to maybe soften a little bit. In lieu of a land acknowledgement, I thought we would spend some time acknowledging sex workers and acknowledging kind of the space. I don't know if this happens for you, Jelena, but kind of the space I know that I used to take to move into this work. Just maybe soften your eyes and we'll allow others to come in as they're coming in. Welcome. And I just want you to breathe and feel into your body. As you can imagine, when you are a person of the evening, when you are a sexual sexpert and athlete, you have to know your body. You have to know your mind. You have to know who you are. And just sit with that for a second. Knowing who you are. Knowing the power of your body. And as you scan, take a scan from maybe the top of your head down, noticing any parts of you that may be tense, that may be tight, because some parts are tighter than others, that may just be feeling like you can love up on them. I want to offer you that moment to do that. I want us to think about those who do this work in power, because there are many of us who do. But I also want to acknowledge others who have no choice but to do the work that we do. And let's hold space for them. And as you settle and think about those who have, those who don't, think about your choices. Think about any notions, any thoughts, any judgments you may have. And I ask you today to just tuck them away for a bit. And take a deep breath with me. Finally. And exhale. And let's acknowledge the space and the land that we are on, understanding that sex work is on all lands, that Turtle Island knows no bounds for enjoyment, for understanding our interaction with nature and our spaces. And finally, as we breathe it in one more time and just exhale, I want you to think about your sexy name. Every single one of you, think up a stripper name or a sexy name that you would like. And if it feels good to you, I'd love for you to put it in the chat. Put it in the chat, because that's what I want us to touch into. That sex work, while it is some work, and we will get into that, there is some joy and power that comes from the autonomy of knowing yourself. And I always found that my sexy name, my work name, always gave me power. And I'd like to think about or see what you guys think, what comes up for you. Put it in the chat if you can think of your sexy name. And with that, let's begin. So this talk is a part of our titillating. So I have some housekeeping I have to do. This talk is a part of a amazing series. Actually, it's not just even a good series, it's an amazing series called Titillating Talks. It's been sponsored by several of our partners. There are many to be listed. I'm going to ask everybody to put it, I'm going to ask our tech team to put it in the chat, because there's so many of us that have been making this a labor of love. And Titillating Talks is all about us talking about the things that we normally don't talk about. You know, the conversations that need to happen, but sometimes the safe spaces to have them are not. Tonight, we are having it. And again, we are going to be talking about the nitty gritty, some of the real happenings around sex work, the questions, the insides, maybe, we'll see, the insides.
Not for free.
Maybe give some you know, different outlays and looks for what this can look like. And Jelena, I like your whole bio is incredible. I'm not even going to try and do the like technical, let me introduce you stuff. Please just speak on it. Tell who you are. Oh, wait, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Carrie Goring, AKA Carrie Sutras. I am, again, a sex educator. I call myself actually a sexy activist, because what I truly believe is that we have to come back into and reclaim the power of what sex and sexuality does for us. So I'm an intimacy and relationship coach by trade. I work very much with queer and people of color to get rid of some of this intergenerational trauma, because I'm a trauma-informed coach. So we work together to bring us back into our bodies and bring us back into places where we can heighten our sense of pleasure, because with your pleasure, with good sex comes great power. And I'm going to pass this over to you, Jelena. Speak on it. Tell us who you are.
Hello, my name is Jelena Vermilion. I use she, her pronouns. I am the executive director of the Sex Workers Action Program, or SWAP Hamilton. I do realize how much, how disproportionate the text of mine versus the text of yours. I didn't realize I would have gauged it with yours. So I'll sort of just summarize. Basically, I'm a sex worker of a decade. I've done pornography as well, including full service sex work for 10 years. I have experience being homeless, being incarcerated, working as a migrant in the United States, being undocumented specifically. And I do a lot of advocacy in the media about decriminalization, about the rights and dignities of sex workers. And also I do advocacy around those who live with or who are vulnerable to contracting HIV. I've done work with the Women's HIV and AIDS Initiative, Molly Bannerman's group. And basically through SWAP Hamilton, we had a drop-in space for a year. We provided, in-person services to sex workers on the stroll where sex work is done on the street in Hamilton. And we also provide best practices trainings to organizations and businesses looking to understand how to provide best service to their clients who may be or may have been in the sex industry. I also was lucky to have been nominated this year for the YWCA Women of Distinction Award. And Swap Hamilton is a member of the Canadian Alliance for Sex Work Law Reform, which is actually suing the government right now to decriminalize sex work. It was heard in October of last year from the 3rd to the 7th in Ontario Superior Court. So we do a lot, and that's just a summarization. And yeah, I do a lot of lecturing at universities. I just was on Sherry Genoble's podcast. Yeah, so that's me. I do a lot. I also work with Trans-Pulse Canada, doing consultation with them. We do specifically talking about police violence, anticipated police violence as experienced by trans and non-binary sex workers in Canada. So we do a lot of intersectional work and work to represent marginalized, BIPOC, Indigenous, Asian, Black, otherwise racialized sex workers, migrant sex workers, people who use drugs, people who are homeless, and sort of throw the idea of respectability out the window. We want to reduce stigma, we want to reduce harm, we want to increase feelings of dignity and humanity for everyone, because we are human. So that's me.
All I can do with that one, you see this? I am like honored, like it's such an honor, like to honestly to have this conversation, because I know you're on the ground on it, right? Like you are right in the throes of the work. And again, for me, like a little bit about my history is I'm an old I'm an old OG. I used to, when I was back in the 90s, however, I used to do sex work in the 90s. I used to be an exotic dancer. I also did escorting. So I was never on like at the street level, never necessarily, but I definitely know what the roles are and how it can go. And I've also had the luxury, because from that point, what I did after I finished or had my time, which was very lucrative for me, I ended up buying my own house and doing stuff with that stuff, you know, that space. Yeah. I ended up becoming a hairstylist with a specialty in extensions. And so with that in my realm, I, of course, had a lot of women who were in the industry in my chair. And it was very interesting that I got to be in a space where I could actually mentor. And I watched the industry move through some waves. So this is why this conversation is really important to me. I've actually done and raised and organized sex workers to keep themselves safe. You know, we'll talk a little bit about what I used to call the whole co-op, the whole cooperative, and how we can talk and get our workers. I love that idea you just said, Jelena, when you mentioned dignity, bringing us back in dignity, allowing us to step out of the shadows, step out of those spaces, because sex work is something that is a constant. Sex work actually is a marker to financial industries. When sex work goes down, you know, when sex workers are having some challenges, like in the clubs, you know, the guys aren't coming in the same way.
You know, a recession is on the midst.
You know, a recession is coming, you know, and it's literally a marker. It's one of the, okay, it's not an unofficial marker, but it's a pretty good predictor. And I will say that's the word I'm getting on the street, that, you know, numbers have been going down. So just take that in mind if any of you are in the financial industry.
Oh, it's true. It's so true. I mean, if you think about just like the canaries in the coal mine, that's sort of what sex workers are, because it's their extraneous income, you know, and they don't always have that when things are tight.
You got it. It is a space where that can happen. And so I would love to start, Jelena, with like our personal stories. What brought you, what was your beginnings? What brought you into this journey of sex work and advocacy? What started it for you?
For me, like, I'm a really open-minded person. And so before I did sex work, I was always interested in it from flawed depictions in the media, which I work to combat with my media archive, which I forgot to mention. I will find the archive link for y'all. But specifically, like, I think there was a couple of videos that I think Milk Money was one of them. Was a big sort of like influence on my perspective of sex work. And then through my mid-teens, I watched The Secret Diary of a Call Girl with Billy Piper. And
Mhm.
I loved both of those. And like I'm from a European descent. Like my mom's side is from England. So seeing that specific depiction in my, seeing Milk Money in my youth and then seeing The Secret Diaries of a Call Girl in my teens was like really formative for me, because I really feel, and like looking back at the series now, I think it's quite a real, like, other than being dramatized a bit for
They gotta add a little,
yeah, like it's quite realistic. The stigma, the struggle, the sort of for those that internalize the stigma, the sort of secret life, right? Because but that was the whole premise of the show, because it's based on Dr. Brooke McNanty's real life experience of being a sex worker. And yeah, for me, that was sort of like that's how my mind was primed to be open to it being any other kind of work. And so when I became homeless, I had suffered a mental breakdown in a relationship that I was that I was in for a while. And I became homeless as a result of that, and I needed to seek stability. And how do you seek stability other than having an income and taking care of yourself? And so I did that, and I got myself my own apartment. And once I got myself my apartment, I continued to do sex work, um, because it was for many reasons. I was affirming to my gender, having sex with men that felt me desirable because I'm a trans, as a trans woman. I was able to experience wealth in a way that I hadn't before, and also a wage that was it felt like me, like an honest trade, and B, like it truly was valuing my labor, as opposed to the minimum wage that I would have had at my cashier job or my waitressing job anywhere else. At least up until that point, because I
Mhm.
started working at like 16 or something, on and off, doing paper routes and stuff. And then eventually waitressing. But so once I had stability, I just continued doing sex work, but I would say for different reasons, because it was something so malleable. The having control over my working hours, being able to say no and discriminate against who I actually provide service to based on our desires, whether they align, based on the feeling I get intuitively through our conversation, through screening my client, and whether that's on the telephone, rarely, or through text. Um, and it sort of really helped me define who I am as a woman today and as a person. And I think that it's really like provided me a real schooling in how to enforce and like um how do you say, like, how to enforce, but also how to know what boundaries to impose. You know what I mean?
Oh, so know what you mean
Yeah,
and can relate. I'm
yeah,
listening to you, and it's we have very similar pieces of this story, and it's interesting to me. So I'll come in, but I just want to hear. So for you, that last little bit where you were going with it,
yeah,
that idea of, when you kind of started doing the work, and you were feeling into it, and how you understood it became about your ability to choose, and recognizing your power. Like,
yeah,
is it not a space, Jelena, where your you know yourself? Like, there's this sense, there's this sense of power that comes from knowing you are desired, knowing your desirability, and recognizing that it doesn't have to be tied to an obligation per se. It's a very simple transactional space that is happening with you and your client, or the person that you're spending that moment with. And I found that exhilarating because I, like you, was coming out of a scenario with one of my exes, and I had 2 children when I started. I had my babies young, and I was in a space where I had 2 children. The money was a little on the tight side, as you could imagine. I also was going to school, and I had my 2 kids. So I definitely needed something that was like malleable, that had flex hours, that would allow me that time to be able to say, okay, I can, take an hour here, take an hour there. And I'll never forget it. For me, what it was is I was also really angry at my ex. I realize this now, looking back. I was angry. I was thinking to myself how I was in this relationship with this man, and he used to cheat on me. I call him the community man. If you know me, y'all know who he is. Everybody's heard me
He's
talk
the
about
waste man.
Everybody knows who my community man. And I would literally catch him cheating on me like every 60 days. Oh. Literally every 60 days. And at that point, I was starting to feel so unworthy because I was trying to do everything right at that moment. But for me as well, like you, I've always been interested in sex. I was that girl. I read from a very early age. And I read my first Harlequin romance at the age of 6.
Oh, wow. I masturbated for the first time at 8. So
hey, I'm with you. Same, right? Same thing. I was always very aware of my sexuality and my body. And I too, first romance by the time I was 6. By the time I was 13, I'd read so many of them, I was bored. I stopped reading them at about 13, but I was very aware, and I graduated to other books. By then I was reading, books about anatomy and sexuality, the Kama Sutra, understanding the flow and synergy of how sexuality and sensuality really affects the space of our bodies and being. And so when my ex and I had that breakup, and I was in my he ain't shit mode, I thought, how am I going to make this money for myself and the children? And my girlfriend called me. A girlfriend of mine called me and said, there's an ad in the paper. So I'm dating myself because, again, I said this was the 90s. We had classified ads when I did this work. And they were looking for companions to, go out with other people. And I literally at the time thought they meant companions. And my girlfriend, who was a little more seasoned than me, said, no, girlfriend, that's not what they really mean. You may end up having to have sex for, in your time with these people. And I thought to myself, you know what? I could probably do this.
Yeah,
because,
exactly.
I was giving it up to him, and it doesn't matter. He was doing what he was doing. So why wouldn't I get paid for it? And so that was, for me, it felt good. So I went down, and it was actually an agency. And I signed up that very night, and I walked out that night, and I made a good sum of money. I don't want to incriminate myself just in case, but I made a very good sum of money. It was the first time I actually had a threesome. I had like 2 clients, so that there was some double money that came up there. And I left that space feeling that night, I was tired, but I left exhilarated. And for me, I was like, yeah, this could be something. I made more money that night than I would have been able to make in two months.
Yeah.
right?
It's exhilarating to be like, oh, it's all a scam. It's all of the, like, it's kind of like the Matrix, like, not to use the trans allegory film, but like, as you know,
Right?
as a trope,
It's
but
funny.
like it is kind of like sort of seeing things outside of the box and being like, oh, this is all like a rat, like a mouse labyrinth, and you don't necessarily have to be within the walls, like you, like, and that's why it's criminalized, it feels like, because it does provide. And I'm not advocating everyone join sex work. I would hate for the market to be more saturated than it is currently.
Right?
And it's just been more saturated over the last decade that I've started. And since Backpage went down in 20, oh my God, it's been so long. 20,
2012?
yeah, I think that's what it was. Like even the like significant decrease in client inquiries and traffic, like actual bookings, I mean,
Yes.
money in our pockets, is terrible. So like I'm not, we're not saying that, I'm not to speak for you, Carrie, but I'm sure you feel this way, that, not that we want everybody to join sex work. We want everyone to feel liberated and make their own choices. And also we wouldn't, I wouldn't want to be cleaning the sewers, and thank God for the people that do that. And
Right?
but like, if you don't want to suck your husband's dick, let the experts do the job,
Right?
like.
Right? And I think you're I love it, Jelena, because you're right. You are 100% right. So again, I often please, we are not saying that, as Jelena so eloquently put it, that sex work is for everybody, jump right in. But I also want to bring some awareness to, there are many different shades to it. There's many different sides to it. Sex trafficking is a real thing. There are some, many people, I won't even say some, many people who do this work, and it's not at their own autonomy. So we are going to hold space for that. But I also want to talk about why that has also been affected, and why we are started, I believe, why we see a rise in that. When you brought up, back pages was, I believe, when it went down, was one of those instrumental things that led to it becoming such a harder space to be a sex worker in. That was one of the pivotal moments that created us having to go back underground. And I let's talk a little bit about that. Let's maybe kind of talk about that, Jelena, what Backpages was. And
Yeah, so Backpage, I'm actually just about to send one of the moderators my interview that was with Anna Saini from the Red Umbrella Collective, to share as well, because they just shared that extra one. There you go. So yeah, Backpages was like basically a Craigslist. It's operated essentially like a Craigslist. It was a classified website. It operated like a Kijiji, literally no different, just it looked a bit different. And I'm actually going to bring it up and maybe show it in the chat, or provide one of the moderators
because
with
it's
the link.
still around. No, it is still around.
No,
Oh, is
no.
it completely gone now?
Yeah, so it was seized, I believe, in 20, I forget what the year it was seized. I believe it was 20, it was a long time ago.
Yeah, it was like 2012, 2015, maybe.
It's over,
Something around
it's over
there.
5 years ago. I'm sure it's in the article that we were just provided. It's just hard to read and speak. So 2019. So yeah, 2018, 2019, it was an investigation that lasted a while, but the website was seized based on the human trafficking law. But the thing that is ironic here, and I just want to make a really important distinction, when we're saying sex work, that is inherently consensual. When we're saying sex trafficking, it's inherently unconsensual. I think we should never talk about people being forced into work, because people can't be forced into sex work. Sex work is autonomous. Sex work is inherently consensual, and sex trafficking or sexual assault and all those other things are not. So I think that like just like keeping like our language clear about that is really important, because I think even journalists get muddled around that, and the way that the Canadian government has spoken about sex work makes people confused about the lingo. So
I love you clarifying that.
yeah, that's something that's just how I like to represent it, because for the history of the word sex work, Carol Lee was at a feminist conference in the 70s, and they were saying that the sex exploitation industry, and she felt, as someone who was engaging at the time it was commonly referred to as prostitution, she felt that objectified her, and so she said that she wanted it to be referred to as sex work, and that's what it is. It's labor, whether that is a popular opinion or not. It takes work to come to orgasm, whether for yourself or another person, with a partner, with many partners. But Backpages, ultimately, bringing it back to the topic, was a website that sex workers would put up their advertisements. It was targeted by the United States government because it was very much used by sex workers. They targeted it under the guise of human trafficking, that it was being used for underage people in the sex trade, being forced into the sex trade, and sex trafficking, and was also being used for not just underage sex, like sex trafficking, pardon me, but human trafficking for labor, not just sex work.
Yes.
So, like sexual exploitation, pardon me, I just broke my own rule. And so calling myself out, it's integrating that. What is funny is that the FBI provided Carl Farrer from the FBI provided one of the former webmasters of Backpage with a certificate of recognition for their participation in human trafficking investigations, because before the website was shut down, because it was such a popular website, many of the FBI stings were centered on this website. So the Backpage administrators were cooperative with the FBI when it was operating.
Very much so.
Right. And so they were able to actually crack down on these legitimate sex trafficking cases more often. But now that the website's been taken down, the FBI has actually admitted it's a lot more difficult. So yeah, that's the lineage we have to deal with.
And I love that so much. Thank you for that share, because I remember when it went down. I, at the time, was, spearheading, mentoring, working in a cooperative of sex workers. There were a few of us, and we and you would know, like, it really was a great place to kind of be able to filter and see all that was happening in the scene. And I remember there being an article I was reading where the head guy at the time, thank you for knowing his name, because I couldn't remember that. But he was talking about being cooperative, and that he actually had a team that worked very diligently in the background to see and make sure, checking the way the ads were being placed, who was moving around. So they had a great understanding of what was happening. And for sex workers as a whole, it was an amazing platform for screening, for being able to just centralize your work. I found it was great, because now sex workers kind of, it's been kind of dissipated. Like, you'll find some sex workers put some stuff on Twitter maybe, or I've seen some stuff in Reddit, but it's not like an easy one-stop shop, and Backpages was kind of that place before. And just like you say, like, that becomes another space where, again, when it's not that simple, it means that people do have to go behind the scenes. And I think that that's where we have started to see some of the shifting, where it has become a little bit more dangerous. It's harder for us to screen. I know there are some forums now. Like, what do you see in the market now? Like, how do you see it now, Jelena? Like, what are your thoughts?
Men are doing the most. Men are trying it so much more often. And it's just like, there was a time when it felt more easy, the work. And I feel like it's definitely like you have to be a lot, it's a lot less autopilot, not
No, no,
not
you're
that
right.
not
I'm
that I'm
with you.
advertising my services as being like I'm on autopilot, but like, to say that it's a lot less cut and dry when you have men who push boundaries, or men who try to haggle your rates, or men who are trying, or pardon me, clients, whatever, whoever is, doesn't really matter who the client is, but predominantly my
It
clients.
is predominantly a man's industry. I know,
Totally,
you know,
totally.
yeah,
And
98%, 99, yeah.
probably, I mean, there's many clients that are disabled, and there's many, there are women clients, but the fact of the matter is that even for the women and non-binary folks that would love to hire a sex worker for their own needs, there, and for those people who are seeking male services, like or services by a male provider, like there's not a good market of male providers. They all act like they're shit don't stink, and
Right.
they don't really embody what it means to be a sex worker. It's more about ego, at least in my experience. It's more about their own. And now there are certainly many male sex workers that I know that have, most of the majority of them that happen to be legitimate, are mostly queer. Go
Right.
figure that. Queer or trans men, or like, BIPOC individuals that like just get it, like they're more likely to be um providing a service that is of value, you could say,
Mhm.
than just performing what maybe like this patriarchal cisgender heterosexual conception of like the ideal sexiness.
Sex workers should be.
Yeah.
I, I get that as well, and I will agree. And I think that's a good point to talk about. I know that for me, I was in the industry for 3 years. I think I saw maybe if I had, I don't know, 200 clients, let's say, because I ended up having a pretty solid roster of clients. I would say maybe I can think of off my head, maybe two that were women that I saw, and only maybe once or twice. They weren't like a regular client that I would have come across like that.
Yeah.
One was about an exploration, was, curious and wanted to know what it was to be with a woman and have that experience. And it was it's one that sticks out in my mind because it was such a beautiful moment. We had a great time in that space, and I remember just, yeah, it was a beautiful experience being with her. But everybody else they were all pretty much men,
Yeah.
mostly married men as well. I had my area of expertise, and I'm curious to hear about yours. My area, I had a lot of disabled clients, actually. And I think a lot of that was because as well, I'm open-minded, right? So it would have been a great time. I would see past a chair or whatever. So I had a lot of disabled clients, and I was also very childlike in my 20s. Like, I looked like somebody who could have been very young. And so one of my areas of expertise became dealing with men who had certain proclivities, but did not want to act on those proclivities. And we literally, would have conversations about this. And so it became like a niche. And I think the word, I don't, because there are like forums for men to be able to like rate sex workers. And so I don't know if I ended up on one of those forums, but I became known for this. And I would literally, by the end of it, if I got to know you well enough, we had like contracts. I would have them sign a contract, especially because I recognized this need that, I was providing. And a part of it was let's talk about what was happening here. for you and make sure that you ain't going out. And I, you never know,
No.
but I genuinely believe that that was a unique service I provided, because many men would come to me and then cry afterwards.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I had men cry afterwards because they were dealing with that guilt and all of those
Vulnerability.
parts. It's debilitating. And it really was a way I used to get thanked and tipped very well, because I would offer a space of no judgment in
Yeah,
those
that's it.
moments as well. Those are things that you don't always get everywhere. And so for me, I recognized that not only was this hard work, because it is, you got to turn that hat on, you got to learn to deal in that way, but I also learned that my service was just that, a service, a unique space that might otherwise go left or go into ways that may not be of service. So I love that part of it. That gave me a sense of pride. It actually really did.
Yeah, I don't know for myself, like if I would say I have a niche necessarily, but I definitely like there's always that vulnerability with men, especially when we're talking about men that see trans women. Like, there's men that see your average sex worker just to satiate their desire or whatever that might be, to feel heard, to feel witnessed, etc., just to be with a warm body and cuddle, get some oxytocin. I think that there's um a real vulnerable place that we live in, especially right now with like all this anti-trans propaganda and hate, and um, the rhetoric that's being spewed about drag performances and stuff like this, which is all real nonsense. I think that we should focus on things like guns and not reading books. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, it is a common niche. There's a lot of men that and like there's a secret underground culture of men who are into underage women. And there's like there's a culture of non-offending pedophiles
Absolutely.
as well, who use surrogates or digital
Yep.
pornography, like meaning not with real people depicted, to satiate those desires without causing harm. um but for myself, like they're just trying, like a lot of them are trying to do like never been with a trans woman before, I've always had this desire, and some of them want to suck me off and some of them don't. Sorry for
Right.
being graphic. And like it really just comes down to feeling comfortable enough to explore their own desires in a space that allows them to do that, and like they couldn't talk about or express their sexuality in this way with anybody else necessarily, or most people in their life, at least the ones that are married men that are coming to, like, and I'll say most married men that I have as clients love their families, and
Absolutely.
and there's not like resentment. It's just like a matter of fact, like I'm not getting what I need in this particular manner in my marriage right now, and so I'm gonna recharge my batteries outside of the home and come back a fabulous father and dad and partner. And I think that, like, that's one way that like sex work isn't really considered as being healing, um but it is, like it's healing when people can explore their sexuality in a way that, like whether we fit, whether we're worried about being judged as being gay, whether we're worried about being judged as being, a pervert. I think that there's, sexuality encompasses a lot of vulnerability for many people for many reasons. You know, body, as the physicality, the embodiment of vulnerability when we engage in physical intimacy, letting another person enter us or entering another person or participating in really vulnerable sensual erogenous body parts. I think that all of these things like lend themselves to deeper feeling, deeper contemplation. And I think that, that definitely is healing. And we have data to show that sex work can be healing. But when Craigslist, was a study from Baylor University in the United States that showed that when the like the place where sex workers would advertise on Craigslist, when that section was removed,
right?
there was a sharp increase in domestic violence cases. And that isn't to say that sex workers are fodder for people who commit violence against women or people who commit violence against their partners, but but I think it's also significant to mention, because when people have equitable access to sex, violence is reduced. And I think it's as simple as understanding, like, when steam is blown off, they're not going to be as impulsive and make poor choices, right?
Oh, preach on it. I love that. I love it. You are right. You are 100% right. And I know that can feel touchy. I know if you're a wife, a partner, and you've been cheated on, I can hold up the hat on being cheated on, but I recognize that that is a very real thing. That I think, again, for me, that this part of the conversation brings up the way that we have structured society, and this idea that when you are, this idea of monogamy, and that, you gotta, sex the same person for the rest of your life. We ebb and flow. Sexuality, intimacy, enjoyment and pleasure ebbs and flows. And, as we, like, a partner that you pick at one phase of your life, it might be great for you. And it may never mean that you don't love that person, or that you haven't built this incredible life. But sexually, you guys may not be as compatible. It may not be the same. And I do this work now, talking about how often we don't allow for just a natural ebb and flow of what sex and what intimacy and pleasure means for us. And I think that we have to talk about that, especially for men, because for me, a lot of what that is I always say they keep femmes, all of us, down because of the fact that when a man is between and intimate with a woman in that way, or somebody who is female orientated, they are at their most vulnerable point. They are you think about when a man is in that moment of calm, they ain't saying, hearing, feeling nothing else.
They're scrambling for heaven.
They're in heaven, and they are weak. That's a weak moment. Like, it could be taken either way. And I think that there's some sort of like primal residual thing that happens where I think men have like some, ancient memory where they recognize that that might have been the time we would come through and maybe, massacre them all in a moment. I don't know.
If they're lucky.
But they know that that is a weakness, and that vulnerability we open and receive to. And I think that we have to take that into consideration when we look at not just sex work, not just what we're talking about, but a society that has created an underground, this space where men can't or don't feel open enough to be able to just be who they are necessarily.
Yeah.
Because I know for me, that was a big part. I want to know about like some of your experiences, like with your rules and stuff. Because like, for instance, for me, one of my rules was I would not kiss. I wouldn't kiss my clients.
I don't kiss now. I don't kiss now. I kiss up until the pandemic, and then I basically use that as a scapegoat to not kiss them anymore, unless I affect them or unless I think they're hot.
Right?
Like, I don't even care anymore. Like, I just, nah. Like, unless I like you, unless like we have a vibe, like, I really don't want to kiss you anymore. I used to be really all about like, yes, like I'm gonna cater to my client and I'm gonna make them feel like individually really loved. And like honestly, like being in my presence and hugging me and being able to touch my body and like me just
Yeah,
being warm to you is enough. Like I don't need to go above and beyond. I don't need to like, as an autistic person, as a person with ADHD, I don't need to like fatigue myself psychologically, emotionally
it's
from every session just to like make sure he gets off a little bit better. Like no, like the regular, like, and I know that people might think that okay, she's a jaded hooker, right? And like maybe and like maybe cynicism, all it means is wisdom with like a little bit of sass, I don't know. But for me, it isn't to say that like I'm a conveyor belt and like I like next I'm like bored, like no, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is work smarter, not harder.
oh, I,
Like my dad used to tell me.
I love that because you're right, right? Like, again, this I think is an important piece. It is work. And yes, we are providing an experience, but it is just that. I know I used to go into a persona of me. Like I had my stage sex name was Eden. And Eden, you were coming into the Garden of Eden. But I also knew in that mindset, there were certain things that I would do that kept me when I was Eden. And then there were things for my man or my peoples at home.
Yeah.
For me, that was kissing. Kissing is what was an intimate thing that I did.
Holding
That was
hands.
how.
Holding hands.
Oh, oh, yes.
Right? Like it's funny that like the more vanilla things are the things that we as sex workers consider the more intimate, emotional things.
Right? Because anybody can put something somewhere, and
Yeah. Yeah.
those things aren't necessarily, and I agree with you because that's so funny. That was one of my other things as well. I didn't do that either. And I don't know about you. Like, do you state your rules? Like I used to like before in my screening, this is what we would walk in with, and it wasn't even because, let's talk about again that and screening. Uh,
Yeah.
I
My
think that's important too.
yeah, my screening process has evolved over the last like decade that I've done it, and like in depending on locale, city, wherever.
Yeah.
Um, but typically, like now, they'll contact me. So typically, they'll find my advertisement. Maybe they'll go to my website before texting me. Maybe they won't. I don't know. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't. But when they text me, I will send them an intro text, which includes a link to a specific page on my website, which has all of the details.
Yes.
I presume, and like on there has like a cancellation policy and like this and that. There's also a policy about like if the person like arrives really like on drugs or like really like out of sorts, like that they forfeited their rate, the rate of the appointment, and that I might ask them to leave, right, without service rendered. Or I mean, usually there's some service rendered, but and I think in my mind, just them getting the privilege of coming into my apartment and knowing, and me being vulnerable to them knowing my residential address, like that in itself is enough for like a $300 like surcharge. Like fuck off.
Right.
But yeah, like no, I'll send an intro text. It has a link to my website. If they read it, they do. If they read it, if they don't read it, they don't. If anything comes up that is like an issue related to whether they read the details or not, it comes up in real time, and then I sort of parse it out with them. A lot of that can mean, do you offer kissing?
Mhm.
Is your, and it's silly because like it's very thorough on the website, so like they could just simply take the time to read it, and then they could book with like their specific, but a lot of the times they're asking redundant questions. And then I end up booking up, I provide my intersection in my city, and then when they repart near, I'll provide further instructions to my door, and then it goes from there. So that's how I screen.
That's
Oh, and the screening, how I make a decision, it would simply be like conversation, their how they choose to respond to my requests, like whether they're voluntarily cooperating or whether there's a resistance, and like just feelings of intuition in my body when I'm talking to them. It's all a combination of like, and like of course you and I know that people might go out of their way to be bad actors and to get in the door and then commit violence against us. But the thing is that, like, you know, we are providing a holy service, and I try not to fear for those things, but certainly I have no reason to doubt that the ones that seem sincere are sincere.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. It's interesting because in my day, how it used to work, I was a little bit before the internet was like a real thing. We still use like the yellow pages in my day and stuff along those lines. So they would call a line. So you would have our number. You would have, like, we would probably, at the time I put ads in like more the papers. We did have some bulletins at the way. And by the end of it, like I definitely had a website, like websites were just coming in at the time. And so for us though, it was the first phone call. And you would have to call in. You couldn't call private. If you called from a private number, you would have to call me back and take off the *67 or *69. I can't remember which one it was yet. *67, I think.
*67.
Yep. Right.
Yeah.
That unblocks your number so that I knew where you were calling from. And you, just like you'd have to follow these rules, right? I'm watching to see if you are going to cooperate that way. Then we would have a conversation. So, you get my stats, who I am, what I look like, as well as the disclaimer. Because again, and tell me if I'm correct on this, Jelena, because at the time for us, it was the act itself was not illegal. So sex itself, between like the exchange of sex, was not illegal. However, everything else leading up to it was. So basically, I may be wrong about this. So basically,
I can clarify if you want. I mean, so
go ahead, please.
The Bedford case was initiated in 2008. I think it finalized in 2014, which is when PCPA was our current laws. So before 2014, essentially, we the sale of sexual services was not a crime, but the purchase, being a third party, benefiting from someone else's sexual, like the money from sexual services, all of those things surrounding the transaction were made illegal. And so that's what the lawsuit was about, the Bedford case. It was basically saying that when sex workers followed the law, they were discriminated against. They had their children taken away, they were deported, etc., if they didn't have status, and when they didn't follow the laws, they were murdered, and all of the above as well. So unconstitutional. But yeah, so that ultimately and then after 2014 the sale is criminalized, but ultimately either way, criminalizing any part of the industry criminalizes all parts.
Well, this is it. And it was very much a thing where you paid for my time. It was never about, because I'm curious, like, so are your services listed on?
Yeah, they are actually. Yeah.
Really?
And I mean, like, the thing is, so I think if you think about it this way, what is the difference between like you having a conversation with someone on Tinder and being like, yeah, I'm into anal, I'm into this, I'm into XYZ, and you meet up and you have sex for free, and then like, doing that where it's just listed on a website where like, okay, these are the sex acts that I'm usually into.
Yeah.
And then like what you're referring to is sort of like then that's what 90 sex workers, I understand, would often
that was
like
our thing.
Amanda from Club 120, or Mandy Good Handy. There was always the what two consenting adults do in private in their own consensual activities is no government's business, right? Exactly. And no police's business. There's no criminality, and like that's like the basis of the surveillance and targeting of sex workers is that there's some criminal act, but why is it not criminal for Susie to give it away for free? But it's okay. It's not, and it's okay when a camera's in the room because that's legal. It's pornography. But
Right.
as soon as there's cash for sex, or for drugs, or for food, or for consideration or shelter, like it's illegal. Like I don't get
Yeah,
it. It's
you
no.
know, it has never made any sense. I often think about, I know some of my friends who've gone out on a date, you know what I mean? And they've gotten a really nice dinner
Yeah.
and then kind of feel obligated to like sleep with this person outside of it. And I was like, all you got was like a dessert, like you guys a pack of ho-hos, you know what I mean? Like what? And and it's
And like,
to
is
me,
the man a criminal for like succumbing to his natural urges? Is he a criminal because he wants to take his woman for a date and maybe get a blowjob? Like, and I'm quoting Terry Jean Bedford, like
yes,
loosely there,
right?
who's a black sex worker.
Yes.
So
And I agree. I like this idea of that we're not exchanging currency for sex. Well, to me, I never understood the difference either when, even this whole setup of when we're talking about marriage, or you're looking for, your life partner, or the person you want to have children with, there's a criteria. You're looking for a person who's going to be able to provide for you, who's going to be able to, give you some of the comforts that you're looking for. That and hopefully they have good genes. You want good genes too. But I mean, there's that basis of that where it is about that currency. You ain't, you want to do
love is
this, I'm gonna look after
conditional.
you.
Love is conditional. This whole idea of unconditional love, I think, is really damaging to people. Like, if you don't have conditions on your love, you are more likely to accept abuse and mistreatment, right? So if I don't have rules and boundaries with my clients, I'm more likely to be able to be mistreated. When people push, you are allowed to say no, and you're allowed to pull back, and you're allowed to say this is the line in the sand and it's holy, and you're not allowed, and these are consequences if you break that covenant.
And what did you find? Like, so in your journey of sex work, has that not really been something that comes front and center? Because I agree with you, right? Like you've learned over the time. I heard you say you've kind of transitioned or tightened up, I'll assume, like some of your screening process,
Absolutely.
right? And I know for me, one of the things that we had was like it was a tight process.
Yeah.
So I learned that very early on from the agency. And the agency, because I went solo within 6 months. Once I had been with the agency for a little while and I kind of had my own roster of clients, I was like, why am I going to even give it? Why am I cut? Like I'm taking my
Like, why are you giving the agency a cut when you can do it all yourself?
exactly.
With the internet, the age of the internet, it made it a lot more easy for sex workers to actually avoid exploitation and work indoors. And that was why Backpage was targeted, because it provided that safety.
And it was interesting because when I did it, we actually had drivers. So we would, because I did mostly out calls. So again, an out call is where you would go visit your client where they are. You're going to their location, and in a lot of ways you're at risk with that, because it's, well, either way it's risky. Like this work can be risky no matter what. But we had a system. So what would happen is I would work with a buddy, like a partner,
A safe
and
call?
we would manage our calls. Normally how it would work is we would have a group of us sex workers. There were 6 of us at the time, and one would do all our call-ins, take all the calls for all of our ads, all of us together, who's on, who's not. And they do most of the screening, and then we'd have a series of drivers. And so our drivers would have to take us where we were, and they'd wait. They'd have to wait downstairs. So if we knew we were going for 2 hours onto a call, they were going to be there for those 2 hours. We'd have to call in at the beginning of that call. You'd have to call back my person, my girl, or my peeps. We'd have to call them back to let them know we were in the call, that exchanges had happened of money. And then you were in for your hour. then you would have to call out. And if you were going to be booked again, or if it was a 2-hour call, it was just a check-in to make sure you were good. So every step of the way, you were okay. And when I look at that, it was, I was interested because that was just what we did. And I don't think, I think I had like one bad call. In the 3 years, I had one bad call. And I was lucky because I had my person sitting right out that door. And if things were going to go on like that, you know, we had our own senses of how we going to handle some things, right? I'm just saying.
We sure did.
Right? But I was lucky, and I remember being shook in that moment. It wasn't a great scene, but I was rescued. It was easy to get out because I had my phone. And I know that in lieu of that, as I went into working with other women doing hair, I was hearing the stories after Backpages went down.
Yeah.
And that access had changed quite a bit. There wasn't that same kind of stringent screening or ability for women or sex workers to work together, or to pull that space in. And especially as a woman of color, like I had to hustle. Like for me, like I was good at what I did, but making that money, it's a little bit of
there was racism, systemic racism in the industry. Like there was a disparity of rates. Like Black sex workers were treated worse and paid less because
100%.
white men were disgusting, and they were just like how they treat trans women differently, and they treat fat women differently. They try to sort of like haggle our rights and sort of force us to do services that we don't offer, and
100%.
bareback services for try to force stuff without condoms, for example, because they think of us as less than. They think of sex workers as less than already, but then they think of like this intersectionality of positionality of you've got a sex worker who's Black, or a sex worker who's trans, or a sex worker who's fat, or a sex worker who's drugs. They think, oh, well, your dignity doesn't matter. And so that reflects in how they treat you. But the thing 100%. Is that sex workers are usually experts at what
they do.
Exactly. Period. And their boundaries, and like knowing what they want, what they like.
100%.
Yeah. So I totally agree with all of it. I wanted to make sure we're touching the 3 questions in the email. Yes. I think we touched the first one.
Yes, we did.
Healing work.
Now, for me, that is an incredible question. I think that, yes, to me, it is healing work. And further to that, again, I think about, okay, so I think that this is on several levels. And tell me what you think, Jelena. I know for me that my time in the industry, it impacted literally the way I moved on and went on in my life. I became a different person. It was funny. My sister knew what I was doing, knew what I was like, and she was like the only one at the time. And I wasn't hiding it. I really didn't care. But, I come from a West Indian background. My parents were already scandalized by me because I had had 2 children very young. So, I would at the time, not necessarily minimalizing it, but I knew that them finding this out would have caused them a lot of harm. I could care less, but them, I knew it would bother them. So it stayed under the radar for a little bit. And I remember my sister used to tell me, you like reek sex, like you just reek that energy. And I took that, like I still walk into a room and again, you get honed for this after a while too. I can literally scan a room and pick up, who's looking, what they're looking at. And it's because we're very attuned, or at least I became very attuned to what men in particular enjoy and like, and I can really use it to my advantage. There is power in that space. And further to it, I had some very good clients who were like really great business owners, CEOs of companies, like, high level intelligence. And in fact, a part of what my shtick was that I was well read. I read the Financial Times. I made sure I was up on, every event that was going on.
The courtesan experience.
Right? Because that's part of the experience I gave. And I literally learned about business. It was a great jumping off point for me to be able to become an entrepreneur. And I went into listen, I can't do math. Jelena, I dropped math in grade 10. Okay. Like I don't, thank God for a calculator. I can't do math. Okay.
Well, working sex is its own, formula, right? Lady Gaga, you were talking about reeking of sex. Lady Gaga had this thing she said a long time ago about wearing a full-length parka and she still felt like she was naked in public. Right?
Right. I love that because it's true. And it's still that. And now I've transferred it because to me, that energy is such a power when those of us who are supposedly marginalized recognize and come back into our bodies. I was broken after my relationship with my ex. I was telling you about. I ain't shit yet. And when I finally went into sex work, I found my power and my autonomy. And, you work hard, right? Like I found discipline. I had to learn how to section out all these parts of my life. I learned to manage. And so for me, those were skills. Like I got some skills now too, but those skills I also took into other avenues of my life. And for me, that became a jumping off point for the work that I do now, because also I got to experience all of the juicy things that you may not get to experience in, vanilla, everyday monogamous sex. I learned to really love my body. I learned to just be very comfortable being naked and just being in those spaces. So for me on a personal level, yes, it was healing for sure. And I often also would offer, and then I'll let you get in here, that for my clients, there were a lot of my clients. I used to, and still very, very dear friend of mine, even to this day, paraplegic client who just, we spent many a time, of course, engaging in intimate moments, but that's what it became, intimate moments. And understanding, his experience being paraplegic and walking with him, because a lot of folks, you can have a disability and be sexy too. You still have needs and desires, but not everybody's going to want to be appealing that way. And we developed such a great relationship. And he often said to me, you're healing and strengthening my back right now. I'm starting to have some sensation in parts of my body that I wasn't having before. And we connected. So do I believe that this work, for whoever who wants to trash it, has those elements? I would say that there's 100% healing that happens on many levels. And I believe that sex workers themselves would be such it's a prayer of mine that you can operate from that idea of understanding the service that you bring.
Yeah, I agree. I think also just talking about the vulnerability of our bodies and nudity and in an Instagram era of perfection and all of these social media-esque expectations, I think that just being with someone nude and having your body affirmed or being accepted, I think is really powerful just in and of itself. healing for both parties, all parties, maybe in some cases. And I'm just trying to go towards the question. So
Yep, there's one here about outside of pushing for discriminalization. What do you feel are the specific challenges that prevent people from understanding how sex work is healing work? That's the one I'm seeing.
yeah.
Um,
Oh, and then how do people, especially trans people in Canada, get into being in porn, starting client-based sex work? So I can say from my experience, I started doing sex work by posting on Backpage, and I now post on Leo List and a few other websites. But the majority of that, like how I got into porn was actually I was literally scouted. Some
were you?
yeah, which is, I know it's a compliment and I'm not meaning to brag, but that's a fact.
Right? Go on with your bad self.
I got texted by, it was Kevin was his pseudonym, from Canada Tea Girl, which is a groovy
Okay.
subsidiary, asked if I wanted to come in and do a softcore, which is just masturbatory solo. And then from there offered a hardcore solo. You can apply to Groovy. If you're a trans person, they are pretty like, the porn industry is a washing machine. Like, you'll go in, and unless you're self-directed, like getting because the culture of porn shoots has changed, and I know we have 10 minutes left, so I'm going to try and summarize all this information in a little packet. But the culture has changed for porn work. It usually, like, over the last 30 to 40 years, like, you could get more production company shoots. Now it's more lucrative to run your own production company, but that also comes with the overhead of the skills required to run a business like that, as well as the time and the administrative like labor and time it takes to edit videos, to market yourself, to write an advertisement, to write copy, to film, direct, all of these things. You know, it's akin to being a YouTuber, but like on steroids,
right?
And so just looking at the question again, starting in client-based work, you can make it whatever you want. You can sell a persona, you can wear a wig, you can wear different shoes, you can, I know some sex workers that simultaneously have ads with different names and different personas, if you want to try and niche market yourself, or market yourself to different niches.
A/B testing.
For Leo List right now, I'd say the thing that's difficult is you have to use Bitcoin. So the way that even I have to refresh my ads is I have to go to a Bitcoin ATM and put in my cash, which uploads directly to my Leo List wallet, which then I use to buy bumps. And then for the other websites, I usually just use my credit card for those that allow it. What resources can someone be provided for safer sex work when starting out, and resources when navigating STIs and sex worker? Brazen by, I believe it was Morgan and Page, is a really great document for trans women specifically, for safer sex, STBBI screening information. I have access to a lot of zines and in the archive, which I think I'm thinking of one in particular by Sydney Stern, I think it is, or Cindy Stern, Tips and Tricks. There's a scene of tips and tricks about tips and tricks. I'm happy to share those.
Reach out if I don't know. I also think sometimes it's great to talk to a vet, somebody who knows.
I'll get a link to the zines.
Brazen Trans Women's Self Sex Guide, that's already been put out.
Sex Work Archive, and then I'll share the link to the zines, and in there there's a bunch, but I think the one in particular that comes to mind is Brazen. There's also the toolkit.
There is the Escorts Toolkit, I think it's called, or Sex Guide. It's
there's a ton in there, so feel free to I just sent that to one of the moderators. They will post it shortly. And oh, I'm still looking at the questions. Right, we're doing great for time, actually.
Great. We are.
How do you practice self-care? I mean, like anybody else, I do drugs and I eat lots of food, and I spend time with my partner, and I my cat, and I masturbate, and I smoke weed. Not that smoking weed isn't a drug, like whatever.
Right.
Yeah, like I'm a human
You,
being. I sometimes scream. Screaming's really fun.
I
For
used to do that.
stress relief. How about you, Carrie?
Same. Again, I think that this is a powerful thing.
Mhm.
I do a lot of like decompressing around it. I meditate. I too, I spend time with my kitties and my like kitties, and then I've got kitties, and I've got two dogs and my partners. I do the same thing because again, it's a job, right? Like that idea of being able to separate the two things you turn on and you turn off. I do believe, however, one of the things I'm actually working on in my work right now is developing like a wellness program for sex workers. Because a lot of the time, and this to me is any job you do, so not even specifically just sex workers, but any job you do, when it's so tied to this idea of money and you don't get to tap into the joy of the work that you do. And for a lot of sex workers, because of the stigmas and the need to be underground and being clandestine about our work, you really don't get to necessarily reap or live in that joy because you're judged or whatever's happening. So one of the programs that I'm riffing on right now, because I think it's going to be a love project. This is a soul project, is building something for sex workers to be able to come from this idea of service, this idea of being a sexual sage. So that is something coming on.
Yeah, like a teacher. And I see we have 4 more questions left. I'm
Yeah,
just going
let's
to jump
go
to the.
with it.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to jump to the one that stands out to me in the list, if that's okay.
Sure.
Um, can you elaborate on how sex workers can support people with developmental disabilities accessing sexual education and explorations of their sexuality and consent? I love this question. I'm a woman who lives with disabilities. Not all disabilities are visible, not all disabilities are physical. I think that I can speak about my experience with clients with physical disabilities. I think for consent, I think that there's just like more opportunities where you're going to have unorthodox sexual interactions with people with disabilities. So for example, I had a client who had suffered a motorcycle accident. He had an amputation from his right knee down, and then he had also suffered some severe road rash and burn scarring, so including on his penis. So one of his quirks was that he loved to be manually stimulated with a cloth, a regular washcloth around his glands and his shaft, because the texture of skin was a little too it wasn't as abrasive enough for the nerve endings to feel it after the scar damage.
Yeah.
So when we talk about consent and boundaries and what we want and what we desire, like this is one personal experience. How about you, Carrie? Do you have one?
I have something similar to that, because again, you're right. Like I recognize that creativity, like when I was dealing with my client, for example, with the disability, he too paraplegic, had been in a car accident. He too had like it was an interesting experience because the nerves, like right where his spinal cord had been injured, he could get certain sensations, but what we found worked really well was, and it took time, but we would use this mixture of like ice
Okay.
and then feathers and rubber. So I would also sometimes wear like a latex or rubber, so because latex it wasn't, he was allergic to latex. So we would use, what's the other, anyways, you get the
like
impression.
neoprene.
Neoprene, that was it. You're very good. See, you remember. Neoprene. He would use that on him. And those 3 things, after a while, we really could get him to, like, because his erection was be hard not to stay all the time, like it would be on and off. And so we would have like these cheerleading sessions. And by using those 3 things together in like a uniform, I used to like start with a cold, so we'd almost numb it down. and then I would use the glove to like warm it up, and then we move back and just use this light sensation. We were able to keep an erection for a period of time, and by the end of it, he was starting to get back sensation. So, because those nerve synapses will work, and it was such a powerful thing to be able to do that. So, it is about creativity and being able to spend a little extra time.
Yeah.
And I can see that we're at time almost.
We are at time, but I feel like the question that's last on the list is something that maybe you could speak to. Do we think that we want to talk
I'm absolutely fine. I just wanted to maybe bring that in. I'm okay with going over a little bit, if that's okay with everybody who's on. If you're okay with us going over, I'd be happy to do that.
We can just answer the questions and leave it at that.
And then we can be complete. Read me that last final question, if you don't mind, Jelena.
Yeah, so the question is, are there resources you would recommend for folks on non-offending pedophiles and just the way that it's written. So I'm going to restate it. Are there resources you would recommend for folks on non-offending pedophiles, and how sex workers can support folks in preventing harm to others and incarceration for sexual violence? So I think that's your, you spoke about your personal experience. So I think you should speak on that.
Yeah. I don't have many resources. I am sure, and I agree with you, there are, and hopefully we can find a few resources in the chat. I'm sure our people are working furiously to put them in there in regards to that. But I do know that, again, I think there is room for some conversations around our urges and desires. And I know in the work that I do right now, I work often with people who have maybe unusual kinks, even as an intimacy and relationship coach. And much of what I do in that work is allowing openings of exploration in a non judgmental way. So if you're sitting with me in my spaces, we're going to figure out what is triggering or bringing on the thoughts. How is your turn on coming on? What is it associated to? Because often certain associations, and I'm not saying this is for everyone, but there are certain associations that bring the way we embody sex and what turns us on differently. And I would offer that is also a space that I see for people who do have some unusual proclivities in those ways. And it's about giving people some humanity to recognize and work through those urges. I found that when I was willing to acknowledge my clients, and I literally had like a certificate, it was like a contract. And I had my own version of a contract when I worked with my BDSM clients as well. But like that contract, it gave purpose and intent to my clients who did not want to offend. It was an acknowledgement of them holding fast to their truth. And in that acceptance and humanity, I think that it went a long way to offering some reassurance in that space. And for me, a lot of people would be like horrified that I could do that work, but I recognize that we can have bad thoughts and ideas, but that doesn't mean you are a bad person. And we have to be willing to look through all of the layers to see and understand where we're coming from and work with it. So I hope that answers the question.
I mean, that's the best we can do. And, we're experts, but doesn't mean we have the answers to everything.
Right. There's some gray lines to everything, right?
Yeah. And really, really cool question, though.
Oh, yeah. Great question.
The only other two questions we have, what does the sex work industry look for queer and trans clients looking to access queer and trans sex workers in Ontario? I would say sadly moot, almost non-existent. There are many queer and trans sex workers,
workers.
I would say they don't advertise themselves or market themselves as such, because the predominant like sex work is a luxury service, right?
Yeah.
So it's not common that people who don't have money or a lot of disposable income are actively patronizing the services of a sex, of a provider. So that is to say, simply ask your regular provider, like, if they
What
know
are
a
their
trans,
services?
yeah, like what service do they provide? Are they gender expansive? Do they know any non-binary or trans, whatever you're looking for,
Yeah.
sex workers? And you might have more success that way. I just would say that you're not likely to find some like that are often explicitly advertising themselves like that.
I
So
agree.
you have to ask. You have to ask, because we're all, it's the cis hetero patriarchy, and we're catering to sort of that male gaze,
Yes.
typically. So and then the last question we have, final question of the evening, is how much can my sexuality change through the years? Really interesting question.
I love that question. I would say a whole lot. I would say a whole lot. I believe that sexuality is fluid. It really is. I mean, you can start off, and we know that sex exists on a spectrum. And so it only would be natural that as you move through the different phases of your life, your desires, your needs, your attractions, things that you may not have thought were in your realm, as your experience grows, you feel an ebb and flow, just like anything else. Like, I think about I've always been queer, so I always had a girlfriend and a boyfriend, and pretty much at the same time. That was just always me. But again, it's flowed. Sometimes I've wanted more men, then I've wanted women. Like, I think that it very much is a thing that ebbs and flows. And I love that. I think we're coming into a time where that's being understood. I'm very much about being open and free, allowing and expressing yourself, your sexuality, because again, it's a powerful space for you to exist in. So yes, it can change and explore and find people who are open to that exploration with you.
I'll say that like sex work has, for me, like my sexuality has mostly stayed the same over the years, but I'll say that it's provided me sex work in pornography contexts, and also in context of full service work. Just like, as you gain more experiences, as you get asked more requests within the context of a client, seeking your services, I think that you just do more things, right?
Right.
So you have like a more expansive, like, I've done that and this and that. And so like, I know in my case, like a lot of my own personal desires have already been like I've had my fantasies met or fulfilled. And so like, I'm satisfied. I'm cool.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah. Like, and like at this point, like, that isn't to say that I'm repulsed by sex or anything, but I'm mentioning this because like I still love men and like having sex with men, but I'm also like I've had sex with women in the context of pornography and in also like some clients, but then I am just less, I wouldn't say excited, I would say less, like I find sex more mundane now. Like I'd rather hold hands and I'd rather kiss, you know what I mean? I'd rather spend quality time that isn't necessarily sexual. That isn't to say, again, that like I'm meeting some sort of cynical stereotype of like a sex worker who's tired and like I just don't want to have sex anymore. Like, I'll have sex, but I really, that is to say that like you focus more on the meaningful connections, however that manifests, So yeah.
I love that, because you're right. I think that is a beautiful answer. Beautiful answer. And also as you get it, I got some age on me. I'm a little more seasoned. And I will definitely say that as I've gotten older, I have found that my sexuality, changes, how I felt about myself or, you know, my sex drive in my 20s versus now I just hit the fabulous 50s. I just hit the half a century mark. And now the sexes, I'm just sure, you know, I've been there, I've done that. But I just know how good it can be on all levels. So it's about really relishing in that space, you know?
Yeah.
So again, stay open, enjoy. And I don't think you're cynical at all. You just work hard, girl. You work hard. That's what that is.
And I work smart.
Right? And working smart. That's a good part of it too. I'm so happy to hear that.
Thank you so much for having me tonight. This
Oh,
is really nice. And I think that the audience has really appreciated it. And the questions have been really cool. So thank you for this opportunity to center the wisdom of sex workers. And thank you so much.
can I say more? I'm like, can you feel the hug coming through the screen? Right?
You can say
I
more,
just,
say everything.
right? I adore you. And I really appreciate having this chance. This was softness for me.
Yeah.
And a chance to just, you know, I see you and you see me. And I hope honestly we do this again because it's so needed.
I'm down. I mean, I could talk about lots of topics. I think that
Right? Because we
sex
didn't even
workers-
touch the surface.
No, it's really true. I think that, you know, depending on the audience and depending on the questions and sort of like the tangents we get off on, there's a lot of things we could really provide poignant perspective on. And
Absolutely.
yeah, but this has been really lovely. I do look forward to another one if it's ever possible.
I'm with you too. This may have to be a thing. I'm seeing yes in the chat coming up.
Well, it was a pleasure. I am going
Yes.
to head to my dinner.
You do that. Thank you, everyone who has attended, who held space. I hope that we've given you a different perspective on what it is to be a sexpert, a sexual sage, and hold space for all of those who have to do this work and love this work, because it doesn't have to be a bad thing. It can be a good thing too.
Agreed.
Agreed.
All right, everybody. Have yourself a lovely evening.
Bye, Jelena.
Bye.
Jelena, go on. We'll connect. I see you.
Absolutely. Hit me up.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.